Okay, we're going to get started then. So welcome everyone to this very special Atlanta Authors virtual author event. My name is Deanna Smith and I'm very excited to have Emily Carpenter here today to talk about her new book, Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters. I just literally finished it and I am still reeling from the ending. It was an awesome cliffhanger. So thank you, Emily. Great job. It was a great book and I really enjoyed it. I've also it got ordered 2 of her earlier books, and I'm looking forward to reading those as well. So a couple of virtual housekeeping items. All of you will be on mute until the end of the presentation. I will open it up after we're all done so that you can talk to Emily directly if you like. If you have any issues or questions you would like to submit for the Q&A section, go to the chat section and you can type your questions in there and I will read them to Emily during the Q&A. Also, we suggest that you change your screen view from gallery to speaker view to have a better experience during this presentation. So try to get into speaker view and instructions are in the chat section for that as well. So Anil, I just want to confirm that you can hear me and see me okay? Okay, great. Atlanta Authors has been holding our author events for the past 12 years, and the list of authors is pretty impressive. Oops, if I can get the list. And I'm sure you'll recognize some of these authors. You may have attended some of these events. I've attended quite a few of these events, and they were really wonderful. The last couple of years have been the most challenging in our history, as I'm sure you could understand. Our Roswell Library, where we held our events, was closed for almost 2 years due to remodeling and renovations. So during that time, we had to find an alternate location. And surprisingly, some of our best events were held off-site during that time. So we had really great attendance. So our fans have been so supportive. And once again, Roswell Library reopened, had its grand opening, and then promptly had to close their doors for COVID. So before we even got a chance to move into our new meeting space, we unfortunately were forced to find alternative means of holding our presentations. And so those of us on the committee, a bunch of old dogs, learned new tricks and we embraced the technology, pushing the envelope, and decided we would try having virtual events. And once again, surprisingly, these virtual events have been some of the best attended events that we have had in the history of Atlanta Authors. In fact, today we have 102 people registered for this event, which is a record breaker for us. So I just really appreciate everyone's participation in this. This is our 3rd virtual event, and it's just fantastic. And the reason that I started volunteering with the library was back then, they told us that libraries might be going away, that they really weren't needed anymore, and that they were going to probably disappear and start closing their doors. And I said, not on my watch, it's not going to happen. So these days, bookstores are under a similar threat, and our authors and publishers need our support more than ever. So we really appreciate you being here today and helping Atlanta Authors keep the literary world alive and well in our future. So Atlanta Authors chairperson, Gail Reed, has been dedicated in her efforts to keep this program going for the last 5 years. And she will be retiring after this event. So Gail, please accept our gratitude for all you have done for Atlanta Authors. And in addition, we're welcoming a new committee member, Louise Conti, who is, in addition, she's also a board member on the Friends of the Roswell Library and one of the founding members of Roswell Reads. So Lou has lots of experience and we're excited to have her join us. In addition to the rest of the committee, myself, Marilyn Barron, Judy Stanton, Hillary Hamlin, and the book miser herself, Annelle Gerson. So great committee that we have. Um, and we are also happy to welcome the East Roswell Library as our newest sponsor for 2021. If you haven't been there, it's an amazing space. Going forward, we will also be partnering with Roswell Reads, and that's an exciting matchup. I mean, we've always, worked closely with Roswell Reads, but Roswell Reads is the group that picks a book for Roswell to read every year. And their annual event in 2021 is going to be virtual, just like us. They're going virtual. And it's going to be held on a new date and time, Saturday, January 30th. So you want to mark your calendars. And they will actually be announcing their book on a Monday. So this is an exciting time of year. Everyone's wondering what is going to be the Roswell Reads pick for 2021, the author. And because you are here today, we are going to let you in on the biggest secret in Roswell, which is who is going to be this year's Atlanta authors. So drum roll, please. We are excited to announce that Ann Patchett, the best-selling author of Bel Canto, State of Wonder, and Commonwealth, is going to be the Roswell Reads featured author for 2021, talking about her latest book, The Dutch House. And I am reading The Dutch House, and I am just absolutely hooked. So registration is free, and will be on Monday. You should get an email with information on how to register for that event, or go to their website, roswellreads.com. So back to today's event. The signed copies of Emily's book, signed by the author, will be available for purchase at Bookmiser at a 20% discount off the cover price. So they make great Christmas, Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa gifts, or whatever you celebrate. So contact Bookmiser. They're located at 3822 Roswell Road, a short drive from anyone here in Roswell, or go to their website, bookmiser.net, for more information, and that's in the chat as well. And at this time, I would like to introduce Annelle Gerson, the owner of Bookmiser, who is going to introduce today's author.
Thank you, Deanna, and good afternoon, fellow readers. Welcome, and again, thank you for joining us on this beautiful day for our third Atlanta Authors virtual event, this time featuring Emily Carpenter. Emily's talent for writing sprouted at an early age. Learning to print and color were game changers, as the budding writer spent her days publishing word for word plagiarized versions of childhood classics such as the Pokey Little Puppy. They were complete with original Crayola illustrations and creatively crafted stapled covers. When she wasn't copying other authors' workbooks, she was walking, sitting, or lying down with her nose in a library book. She went on to graduate from Auburn University with a BA in communications and 2 minors, one in journalism and the other in theater. She moved to New York City with her husband, landed a job at CBS Television in the daytime drama division, where she oversaw the production of the soaps As the World Turns and Guiding Light. Emily and her husband moved back to Atlanta, where she pursued other television-themed writing, such as spec soap scripts, screenplays, and indie films. It wasn't until her 3 boys were in school full-time that she decided the time was right to take the leap and write a book. She joined both the Atlanta Writers Club and a local critique group. She devoured several excellent craft books and listened to that inner voice, calling her to write since she'd been that little girl, making copies of her favorite childhood tales. The rest, as they say, is history. 2020, Emily Carpenter is a critically acclaimed best-selling author of suspense novels, including Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, published in 2016, The Weight of Lies, published in 2017, Every Single Secret, 2018, Until the Day I Die, 2019, and Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters, 2020, and the book we celebrate today. Atlanta's own Jocelyn Jackson says, prepare to be up late with this one. Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters is simply riveting, and I must agree. This is the kind of book where the past has a pulse and teeth. It's a page turner for sure, with well-drawn, complicated characters whose choices linger long after the last page is turned, just like Deanna told us. Fellow readers, please join me in welcoming Roswell's own Emily Carpenter.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anel. That was the loveliest introduction. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? All right, awesome, wonderful. So I'm just kind of blown away. I'm like, who is this person you were talking about? Oh, that's me. Okay. It's funny to hear about your experience in your life, like a book, like a story. But that's a little bit about what I want to talk to you guys today is my love of story. And it's almost bigger than books. It's something that has really made my life worth living in a lot of ways. And it's brought friendships and deep relationships, and it's brought comfort to my life. This love of story. So anyway, I want to back up and I want to thank the Atlanta Authors Series for having me. I'm super, super honored. I've seen a lot of your guests talk and just been mesmerized at the talent that's in the state of Georgia and in Atlanta in particular. But Deanna, thank you so much. And Gail Reed, Hillary Hamlin, Judy Stanton, Marilyn Barron, and of course, Anel, my dear friend, who I would run into periodically at the Starbucks while I was, which used to be my office, my writing office. And she would say, what are you working on now? So it's really lovely to have you guys here. And I thank you so much. Thank you all for joining me today and spending your Saturday listening to my story. And I hope at some point to hear some of y'all's stories, because I think that's what really, there's a great community of writers here in Georgia. That's one of the things I've discovered about being a writer here, and particularly a suspense writer. There's really a great community with the writers, and so I always like to hear from people who are embarking on that writing journey. So later we can talk about, you can reach out to me on my website and let me know how you are. But so I want to say thank you. And I do want to talk about the new book, Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters. But I did want to back up. I feel like Anel gave a very good bio of my life, but I did want to clarify some things so that you can get to know me better, and I can sort of describe how I found my way to writing the kind of books that I write. So I was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1967, which I know you're not supposed to say how old you are, but to heck with that. We're loud and we're proud about how old we are. But the reason why I do tell you when I was born, and you can obviously do the math, but it's because I was born in a very particular time in a very particular place that ended up sort of informing my interests and my thoughts about things and some of the ways that I work out story and issues in my books. So if you know anything about Southern history, and particularly Alabama, 4 years before I was born was 1963, and Birmingham was sort of the hotbed of the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. had decided that this was going to be sort of the proving ground to get the Civil Rights Act and to get the right to vote and desegregation. All of that was going to sort of come to a head in Birmingham. And so there were the sit-ins and the protests and the marches, and there was the violence and the bombing of the Baptist Church on 16th Street. And all of this happened in 1963 before the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So when I was born 4 years later, I think, I'm not sure, but I think people were ready to move on. They didn't want to talk about it. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't hear much about it. I think there was maybe a little shame in what was going on. And so I was never really taught about the historical events, and certainly not about the implications of those events on our nation in a bigger sense. And just sort of the context of it. So I was in a very sort of insular, protective world, and it was a good place to grow up. I was, you know, I grew up in a very devoutly religious family, Presbyterian, well taken care of, and well educated. And my mother took me to the library constantly. Now, the library in Birmingham was a very sort of glamorous place to me. And I've had to go back and visit it as an adult just to try to like say, was it really just this palace that I remembered it being? And I mean, truly, it's very beautiful. It's this old neoclassical building. I'm not sure when it was built. It might have been in the 20s perhaps, but it's all of limestone, and it was big. And I remember as a child just sort of running through it and just being awed. And there were these murals on the wall, and it's just really a stunning place to discover books. So it almost feels like a temple. You know, I felt like I was discovering these stories in a very sort of holy, hallowed place. It's still a part of the Birmingham Library system. I think it's just the research arm, and they've built a newer, more modern branch. But I really like to go back and visit those old rooms and remember just spending hours prowling around the shelves and finding books. I will say too that, like I mentioned, I was raised in this very religious and somewhat strict home, so I wasn't allowed to watch very much television. My mother kept my mom and dad kept a very firm, you know, sort of like, you can and can't watch this, but for some reason, they did not have the same standard with books. So I read everything. So now, you know, if my mom and dad are listening, that's like how I learned everything I probably shouldn't have learned fairly early in life, because I just, you know, I had these stacks of probably highly inappropriate books that I was bringing home as a young girl. But I would just blow through the stacks of books, and my mother would say, no, you need to slow down, because we can't go back until, I'm not going to take you back for 2 more weeks, and now you've already read all your books, and so now you're just going to have to live with that. But I have wonderful memories of that place. But and like Annelle said, I had my plagiarism period, which I have repented for. But I tell you, I never dreamed that I could be a writer, because I just assumed that writers lived in New York, of course, and they knew publishers who were in New York, and they were very cosmopolitan and sophisticated, and I wasn't. I was just a girl in Alabama, and I didn't know those people, nor did my parents. So I thought, well, I can't be a writer. I don't, I loved stories. But of course, as I got older, I realized that that was a possibility. And these were the pre-internet days, so still the sort of the knowledge and the process was a little mysterious at the time. Like right now, it's all at your fingertips. If you want to be a writer, you just Google, and the Google machine will tell you how to do it, how to find an agent, how to look for a publisher. And I think that's fantastic, because I think that it has opened up the market to people who might not have that opportunity otherwise. I did go to Auburn, War Eagle, and I met my husband there, my husband to be. I got married right after graduation, and we promptly moved to New York City, where, as Anel said, I went to work for CBS television, and the two soap operas that were taped there, As the World Turns and Guiding Light. And my job, it was a very interesting time for me, because when I was at Auburn, I never took a writing class. I never, again, didn't really imagine that that was something I could do, but I did want to work in television, and I did kind of toy with the idea of being an actor. I toyed with the idea of being a journalist. I realized very quickly that journalists, reporters have to ask people questions who don't want to be asked those questions. And I realized I was far too timid and nice to pursue that line of work and to pursue people who did not want to talk to me. So I thought, I'd really like to work in television, but I don't know exactly where. So as Providence would have it, I did land working for the director of daytime drama at CBS. And my job was to read the scripts of the CBS shows, I would say like 2 to 3 weeks ahead of their taping, and to then summarize a week's worth of taping in 4 or 5 sentences, so that the AP could put them on their on everyone's newspaper page. Back in the day, if you remember, we had these things called newspapers that had the daily shows listed out, what was on your TV that day. And, in one corner you had your horoscope or your bridge moves. And then like every Friday, I think there was a little paragraph that would tell you what happened in your soap opera that week, in case you had missed, some of the momentous happenings. And so that was my job, was to read these scripts and to figure out what would matter, what were the big events that would matter to the viewers. And now, of course, when I look back at that time, I realized that I like to call that's when I got my MFA. That's when I was reading constantly and sort of seeing how these writers crafted drama, and seeing what were the most important plot points, and also really kind of learning about audience, what matters to audiences or / readers, and how they would react to their characters and interact with them. We had some interesting callers. I would answer phones at CBS and have people call and complain about, what the characters were doing, or say, how could you let Billy go to rehab? That's that y'all are so mean. And I would not be able to tell the truth that the actor who was playing Billy actually was in rehab and had given the authors permission to write that into the story. But that was, you know, that was hush, hush. You could, you know, but just seeing that kind of connection that people have to story was very important to me. And then just the whole element of A and B story, that kind of technical stuff of how you work in plot and subplot and cliffhangers. And so, yeah, I was getting a whole education doing that job. So I was young, I was in my 20s. My husband and I were thinking about maybe wanting to start a family. And in my youthful confidence, I thought, well, you know, now that I've worked in television, surely I can write screenplays and get in the movie business. That should be easy. So we moved back to Atlanta, and I immediately just started, I kind of taught myself how to write a screenplay. I did take a workshop, but I bought a lot of craft books and learned how to structure a screenplay and how to, you know, sort of work with the form, and the format is a very particular thing. And I wrote several of them. I think I wrote in all 7. The goal was at the time to get an agent. What I didn't realize was getting an agent in the movie business was a very big deal. It was almost impossible. And it's, unless you were in Hollywood, unless you were kind of hobnobbing and networking and whatnot, it was very difficult to start a screenwriting career in Georgia. I entered some of my screenplays in contests. I think the closest I ever got to anything was I was long listed at the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, and thought for sure that I was going to be selected to go meet Robert Redford and consult with him on my screenplay, which was very motivating. But that unfortunately did not happen. But for me, that was a real moment of somebody sort of outside of friends or family telling me, yes, you can write, you can tell a story, you know, you have got the chops to do this. And so it was a very important moment for me and kind of a game changer. And I decided to stick with the writing. Of course, at the same time, I was starting to have children. I have 3 boys, and they were babies and then toddlers, and it was a lot of work. And I was very lucky and wanted to stay home with them. But you know, that was just took a lot of my time and focus. And yet I was always writing things. I co-wrote some screenplays with people and did get involved in a couple of indie film projects. But I guess I still just hadn't really found my place, you know, and I hadn't felt like that I was going in the right direction. So I was a little bit at loose ends. So when I guess, you know, I don't know, we talk about these birthdays, and I'll come back to this. Another reason why I told you when I was born, but you know, we have these birthdays of like the decade birthdays, the 30, when you turn 30, when you turn 40, when you turn 50, when you turn 60. And we tend to make them these milestone birthdays, and we think about what we've accomplished, and we judge ourselves sometimes too harshly. But it can also be a very motivating thing as well. And I think, you know, so when I turned 40 and my kids were really kind of a lot more independent and firmly ensconced in school and stuff, you know, I started thinking this aging thing is going in one direction, and if I don't do something with my writing, nobody's going to do it for me. You know, nothing's happening with screenwriting, so I think maybe I could write a book. But I was very intimidated by the idea because, again, I was, you know, I felt like I wasn't qualified. I had not majored in creative writing or fiction. I had not taken classes. I had not, you know, I didn't have a degree, which should not stop you. But for a while, it did really sort of intimidate me. But I decided, well, I will say that something that really inspired me was a woman who had been a former classmate of mine in Birmingham, in junior high and part of high school. Around that time, she came out with a young adult trilogy, and I had read the first one, and she was living in Paris. She seemed to have a very glamorous life, expat, you know. But I read an interview with her, and she said, you know, I was an art history major, and I had not taken any writing classes, and I just wrote this book. And I thought, you know what? If she can do it, I can do it too. And I really, interestingly, years later, when I was about to publish my first book, I did go to Paris, and we met for breakfast. And I told her the story about how reading her interview had really inspired me, and it was really very cool. And then she gave me a great blurb for my book. So thank you, Amy Plum. Also, her books are fantastic if you want to read them. The Die For Me trilogy, The Revenants. Anyway, so that was, yeah, I was going to do this. I was going to write this book. And so I wrote a book about, I wrote a rom-com. It was, back then they called it chick lit. They don't say that anymore, but they call them rom-coms now. But they were a very popular genre. And so I wrote this sort of rom-com romance fun book that I thought was fabulous. And by this time, the internet was our friend, up and running, and so was the Atlanta Writers Club, and I had so many resources. I got all the information to explain to me how to get an agent, how to write a query letter, how to, just everything you needed to know. So I did that after I finished the book. I wrote a query letter. I queried many, many agents, and I'm honored to tell this story. I know it sounds a little unusual, but I'm honored to say that I was rejected by 162 agents for that book. But I'd love to tell people that story because, number one, because you always read stories about other very well-known authors who say, yes, I was rejected by 20 agents. And I'm like, that's nothing. I have got you beat by like 8 times. You know? And also because that is the life of a writer. It really is. It's rejection, and rejection on many levels. And I think one of the qualities that a writer needs to have is that resilience, to sort of keep going. So I did. I put that book away, and I decided to write another book. I decided to write a suspense book and a sort of a mystery, even though I didn't know how to do that either. And I came up with the idea. That book was Burying the Honeysuckle Girls. And without even realizing it, I sort of pulled in, you know, all these years I'd been learning about being from Birmingham and the things that had gone on in Birmingham, and just sort of exploring my own personal issues. And this book, I think I pulled in a lot of those issues, just like the role of women in the patriarchy and all the different generations, the sort of wide misunderstanding and abuses in the treatment of mental illness, and the sort of the scandals of the abuses at the state mental hospitals, the issue of religion, the issue of race, the sort of element of mysticism that we find. And what I've realized after I wrote the book and I gave it to a couple of people to read, they started calling it Southern Gothic. And I was like, oh, that's not Southern Gothic. That's just my life. That's like what I know, that's what I grew up with. And I was like, oh, I grew up Southern Gothic, apparently. So I didn't go into it with a real sort of understanding of, I'm going to write this Southern Gothic book and market it as such. It just sort of was the book of my heart. And I realized all these issues were a part of my life. After that book came out in 2016, I kind of divided up. The rest of my books were either, I think the next two were set in Georgia, and then the fourth one was in Alabama. And then this book, my fifth book, Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters, is also set in Alabama. And it is kind of the follow-up to Honeysuckle Girls, while not being a sequel in particular. It is Southern Gothic as well, but it really focuses on one aspect of Southern Gothic, which is sort of the religious role in the South. And this really, I think, quote that I just can never get out of my head, which is a Jamie Cornegay quote. When somebody asked him what Southern Gothic was, he goes on this long explanation of all the things that are included. But here's what he says at the end. He says, "There is God and the devil standing in the muddy, snake-swarmed baptismal river, holding hands." And I just think that's beautiful. It gives me chills every time I read it, because it really is true. It's that fine line between God and the devil, and when people pass from one to the other, and what makes people, go from one side of darkness to light and back again. And just these kind of questions that I've always been obsessed with, like what is sort of, who is God, and what is the miraculous, and is it real? And what do we do about the hucksters that clearly use that kind of stuff to raise money? And is there anything real underneath that? All those questions have sort of obsessed me since I was a little girl, and a topic I'm very much interested in. So I have a few more minutes, to talk about the book specifically. Okay, great. So what I wanted to do when I was thinking about this book, again, I didn't want to write a sequel to Althea is the main character in Burying the Honeysuckle Girls. And boy, that woman went through a lot. So I really didn't think it was fair to write another book and put her through, more angst and shenanigans and terrible things. So I thought, we'll let Althea be happy. And I decided to take another character in the book, a character named Dove Jared, who is, she's the original Honeysuckle Girl, which I won't spoil that for you if you haven't read it. But the book has got a current narrative, present day narrative, and then it's also got a narrative set in 1930s Alabama. And Dove actually is present in both narratives. In the 1930 narrative, she is an extremely young, very beautiful and charming wife of a itinerant traveling tent evangelist slash healer, a man named Charles Jared, who goes around the country and sets up his tent and has meetings and revivals and miracles and heals people, and then collects his money and moves on. Well, he has this very young, charming, beautiful wife who intersects with one of my main characters, and we find out that Dove is maybe not all she seems to be. She seems like she might be a little bit of an embellisher. She might be lying about some things. She might be a little more worldly than you would expect a young, innocent wife of an evangelist to be. Like perhaps she's experienced some things in her life. And she may or may not have this miraculous gift. We're really not sure in the story. But I was always fascinated with her. I always thought there was way more to her story. And so I decided in reviving the Hawthorne sisters to tell Dove Jared's story, and to kind of show her humble beginnings. She was actually born to a patient in the Alabama State Mental Hospital. And when she's 13, she runs away because her mother has died, and the hospital is a terrible place to be. And so she runs away, and this is during the Depression in the 1930s, and she has a series of sort of adventures as she learns to survive the streets. She takes up with a gang of kids who are orphans and are making ends meet by, petty thievery, and just they're just living that hard scrabble life. And it was really interesting. I got to do some really interesting research about children like that. There were a lot of homeless kids and orphans who were just roaming the streets looking for a way to find something to eat and to be safe. And I saw a lot. I actually had a whole book. I found a whole book of photographs of children in the Depression. Not all of them street kids, but that really went a long way to help me figure out who Dove was. And so the story continues from there. She finds this other young girl, and they join forces and decide that they both sing very well and seem to have a stage presence. So they become this sort of gospel singing preacher duo in the 30s in Florence, Alabama, and they gain a little bit of celebrity notoriety. And so the story goes from there. The present day story is Dove's granddaughter, Eve, who is running the family foundation. That because Dove was so successful in her career and made so much money and became a sort of a celebrity in those circles, there's now this family foundation to run. And Eve is very conflicted because she is not sure what she believes, and has actually come to some knowledge that her grandmother was a liar and a con woman and never believed what she preached. So that is the story of reviving the Hawthorne sisters. And I think maybe I'm out of time. I'm not sure because I forgot to start my timer. Go on. The one thing I did want to say, you know, when I started is that it's been a very sort of providential road for me. Like I said, I think about that the things that I wrote in my 20s and even in my 30s. And sometimes I'm really glad that I was not able to find an agent or to be published or to, you know, find a level of success, because what happened to me through all those years was that process of sort of coming to terms with where I was from and the reasons I didn't know about Birmingham's history and what that meant to me and what my role in that was, and my role in terms of what stories maybe belong to me to tell and what stories don't belong to me. I think we have this whole new crop and generation of writers who are going to be the new Southern Gothic writers, who are going to tell another side of a South that, you know, has some sins to face up to, and some redeeming of itself. And I think that is really exciting. So I think I what was really, as I look back on the career I had and this sort of later in life career, so I wasn't published until I was 48, which now actually sounds really young to me. I used to tell that story and it's like, oh, that's so old. And now I'm like, no, that's actually really young. But I'm really thankful for that. I'm really thankful that I had time to get to know myself better, that I had time to sort of train myself and learn how to be a writer and understand genre and understand story and understand the things that I really wanted to talk about in my books. And listen, my books are not, they're not issue books so much as they're just sort of set in places and families, and so those issues kind of crop up a little bit, but mostly I think of them as suspense, as thriller, as mystery, and I hope they're fun. I hope they're engrossing, you know. But yeah, I hope that they deal with some real issues, you know, that we all come up against in the South. So.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was awesome. I just have gotten this book, which is the Burying the Honeysuckle Girls.
Right.
So I'm actually going to be reading this one after I've already read your new book. So kind of in reverse order, but, and I also read The Weight of Lies, which I loved. The Weight of Lies, I guess, is set in Cumberland Island or Jekyll Island.
Yeah, it's actually like it's kind of it's an imaginary island down there that I made up, a fictional island called Bonny Island, named after Anne Bonny, one of the few female pirates back in the golden age of piracy. But yeah, it's kind of a cross of Cumberland and St. Catharines, and yeah.
Yeah, so I love that book because that's one of my favorite parts of Georgia. I love St. Simon's.
Yes.
We go down there all the time. We have friends down there. And so getting to have that book based there, The Weight of Lies, was absolutely wonderful because you also get this, I don't know if it's a fictional history of the island, but it was very neat to hear a little bit more about that Indian history and stuff. I really enjoyed that part of it too.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask you, the Weight of Lies has a fictional track, a book called Kitten, which is actually one part of the book, and then the current contemporary, what's going on now. And so there's, you know, they switch back and forth between them. And the same thing happens in Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters. You have the historical track and then the current time. was it confusing going back and forth between those two and trying to keep them straight? And is it hard
So,
writing? I mean, to me, it's hard writing a book in one time frame, much less two. And then I was reading both of them at the same time. So, yeah, I
yeah,
don't know how you did it.
well, I will tell you, so the positive of doing that, of having like either a dual narrative or like in Weight of Lies, the excerpt of the kitten book. The good part of that is that you don't have to write as much. Like the story's shorter. Like if your story is just one timeline, it is so daunting. That is a lot of words and a lot of, and so I always love when I have another story to kind of switch to, because I feel like more can happen and it's more exciting, and it has more of that page turning quality. And I think too, with in particular with Kitten in The Weight of Lies, that was a very fun challenge to me, because so the author of that book within a book, the fictional book Kitten, she is this extremely famous, internationally known, and has won all these awards, horror writer. And she's an older woman now, and has made just boatloads of money. And she's not even a bit of a diva. She's a huge diva, and like the world revolves around her. And but she wrote this book as a sophomore in college. So she was this kind of wonderkind. I don't know how to say that. That's the hallmark of a reader, when they don't know how to pronounce a word that they've read. So she was this prodigy, right? And everybody just, the world fell on their knees for her, and she believed all the hype. And but apparently the book was not incredibly well written. It's been criticized that way. So when I wrote that was the most fun I ever had, was writing a book badly, like on purpose. Like I didn't want to write it too badly, because I didn't want to make myself look bad, right? But there was a lot of purple prose, and it was very sort of florid, and it was very kind of in this 70s overblown style. And I had a blast with that. So it was very fun to kind of do something new. And I was like, oh, it's time for a Kitten chapter. What horrible purple prose am I going to write?
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so you had mentioned that your current book, Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters, is a Southern Gothic novel, and I had thought of it when I was reading it that one aspect of it was historical fiction.
Yeah.
To me, it told a lot about the evangelists of that day and how they traveled around and did their tent thing and the healing and all that. But one of our attendees, Lynn, is asked a question, which I have the same question. That's a good question. What exactly is Southern Gothic, and how does that differ from historical fiction?
So this is like, I feel like I could talk about it forever, but I won't. Southern Gothic is, so it comes from Gothic literature, which is typically what you think of when you think of the Bronte sisters. You think of Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, and you think of, on the windswept moors, and there's always this crumbling, foreboding castle or mansion or manor, and there's typically a damsel in distress, and there's a villain, and so there are these tropes in traditional Gothic literature. So I think and it's a lot about the emotions evoked, like that you're supposed to feel dread and fear. Oh, and there's sometimes ghosts, and hints of a ghost, like someone maybe that you hear walking on the third floor that turns out to be the hidden wife of the man you're in love with, you know. So Southern Gothic would then be that some of that same Gothic element transposed into the American South, right? So you have a lot of old crumbling mansions. It's very much about the fall from grace that happened to the South after the Civil War because of slavery, and sort of how the that privileged elite class was no more, and kind of the fallout from that. So there's a lot of like strange characters and broken kind of people, and there's definitely dealing, you know, a lot of dealing with the racial issue and the religious issue and ghosts.
Great,
So,
great. Well,
yeah.
that really explains it. That's very helpful. There is a mysterious lost coin called the flowing hair dollar that plays a big role in your novel. Where did you get that idea? Is it a real coin, and is it truly worth millions of dollars?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. It's a real coin, and I really, like, when I was coming up with the plot for Hawthorne Sisters, I knew that there needed to be what in the movie business they call it a MacGuffin. So it's like the thing that everybody is after, but it doesn't really matter that much what that thing is, you know. It's like the Maltese Falcon. It's everybody's after the thing, right? And so I needed it to be a very small item that could be easily hidden that was worth a lot of money. So I just did my research and found out that the most expensive coin that was sold at auction in 2013 for over $10 million was something called the flowing hair dollar. And it's one of, like, I don't know, 15 left. It was one of the first coins minted by the US federal government in 1793 or 4. And you know, obviously very few left and very rare. But I was like, oh, I could work with that, a flowing hair dollar. So yes, my character of Steadfast Co, the old man who lives in Florence, Alabama, and hires young Dove, who goes by Ruth, he is a coin collector, and he actually has a flowing hair dollar that goes missing. So,
well, and if anyone does have questions, feel free to type them into the chat area and I will relay them over. One question that I had was, you talked about that you had written screenplays in the past, and your novels, several of them seem perfect for the big screen. Do you have any plans to write screenplays? Is that something you would do or someone else would do, or any movie plans in the future?
right now, no movie plans. But yeah, that is definitely because I grew up such a fan of movies and being in television production. That is definitely something that I would love. I think it's just even since the pandemic, those kind of sales have slowed down a little bit. But I just heard the other day Jennifer Weiner got a movie deal for Good in Bed, her book that came out in the 90s, I think. And so I was actually really heartened. I thought, oh yeah, you know, it can happen years after you publish a book. Right now there are no plans, and yes, I'd still love to write another screenplay. But I haven't done it yet. So, but yeah, definitely come find me. You know where to find me.
And along those lines, of course, the usual question, which is, when can we expect your next novel? If you're far enough along in the process, could you tell us a little about what you're working on?
Yeah, I can. Well, the first question is, I'm not sure when. I may skip a year here because this book came out later in 2020, and as you know, like, everybody's businesses have been disrupted by what's going on. So I'm not sure of the date, but yes, and the book is a little bit of a genre twist from what I've been doing. It's actually got a little more actual magic in it instead of just, as I tend to have like hints of magic in my book. Well, this one has got a full on magic house in it. So, but I can't say too much about it, mainly because I guess I'm a little superstitious. But yes, there's magic house, and it affects time in a certain way, and it affects the people who live inside it and the people who live outside it. And yeah, that.
Well, that's definitely something to look forward to. How
Yes.
exciting. I love that.
I had so much fun writing it. It was really, really fun.
Well, I think this will be our last question. I don't see any in the chat. So the question was, has it been challenging for you and your family during COVID, and has staying at home helped or hindered your writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like for everybody, it has been challenging. I will say, in my period of life, I have 2 sons out of the house. One son left who is in high school and has, for the most part, been able to handle. There was some, remote learning going on for a while, but he's very self-sufficient and mostly shows up for class like he should. And my husband works from home as well, which is a blessing. And of course, I work from home or Starbucks like I used to, where I used to CNL. But yeah, it was strange for me when it first started in February and March. I think just the unknown and the stress of all of it, writing turned out to be a way for me to distract myself and to kind of hide a little bit. So I have written many books. I've written a surprising number of books, and I'm not sure where all they're gonna go, but I was extremely inspired, and mainly I think just because it was a safe place for me to go inside my head and think about a world where none of this was happening, and it felt very therapeutic for me, a little cathartic, and yeah, so it was a productive time for me. I think that has kind of slowed down now, but yeah, it was surprising because I had a very hard time concentrating on reading. I think a lot of people maybe did, but I kept trying new books and saying, until I would find that book that really captured my attention. But yeah, so yeah, that's when I wrote the Magic House book, was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I called up my agent and I was like, okay, are you sitting down? I have this strange book that I've written and we need to talk about it. So yeah.
Well, we can't wait to read it. So I want to thank you for being here today, Emily, and let's all give her a big video clap, hands in the air. And I don't know if you can see everyone, but and I wanted to remind everyone that Bookmiser will have signed copies of Reviving the Hawthorne Sisters, as well as Emily's earlier novels, available signed copies for purchase. So check the chat or visit Bookmiser yourself. And we hope to see you all again at our next Atlanta Authors event, which will be in February of 2021. And we'll be sure to email you the details about that. And I am going to unmute everyone, and we'll stay on the line a little longer so that if you'd like to talk to Emily directly, you may. And thank you so much for attending, and everyone be safe. And all right, so I've requested everyone can unmute
Yay,
yourselves
wonderful.
if you'd like to.
Excellent.
That was great, Emily.
Thank you.
So Emily, I do have a question.
Yes.
If someone came to you today and said, okay, we're going to make one of your books into a movie and you get to pick which one would you pick?
Oh.
Weight of Lies, Weight of Lies.
I can't. I mean, maybe it really would be Weight of Lies, just because I feel like it might be one of the easiest ones to film. And oh yeah, and just the setting of that, like with the island, and there's these wild horses, and yeah, and just to have like the kitten flashbacks, that would be really cool too. So maybe so. I think, when I think about the Hawthorne Sisters and Honeysuckle Girls, and when I watch movies that are present day and past, it's to me it works better in a book than a movie. And I mean, I know it can be really well done, but it's a little jarring when you come back to the present, I feel like, visually. So I would feel like somebody really, expertly could deal with that. But I just think that might be a little more challenging. But I also think Every Single Secret is based, it's like set all in this one house. So that one would be the least expensive. Because it's like basically one setting. But yeah.
Okay.
Maybe so. Maybe Weight of Lies. Good question.
Anyone else have a comment for Emily? Question?
I have a question. So which book should I read first? And are these books good for book club? Do you have, they come with like readers' guides and questions? Which one should we read first?
So all of my books really are true standalones. You can read anything first. I think you should read the description of what each book is about, to decide if that would appeal to your book club. I think I have book club questions for Honeysuckle Girls on my website. I don't usually include book club questions because I almost feel like I don't know. I just haven't really ever done that. I will say the one time I had a book club and provided them with the questions, they asked me the questions. And it was one book club I was visiting, and I was like, no, don't, these are for you guys to discuss. For me, I felt like I was being tested. But yeah, so I should do better about that, providing some questions, because I know that really does help in the book club. But honestly, like, I think all of them are good for book club. I do. They're all my babies, so it's hard for me to choose which one, but there's certainly no specific order.
Thank you.
You need to go on. You're welcome, Sue.
Thanks.
Anyone else have a question or comment? You can unmute yourself if you like. All righty, well, if there's no other ones, then I will end this event, and thank you all for attending, and we will see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye, guys.
Bye. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.